Imagine a man walks into a bakery in Ephesus holding a silver coin. He just wants some bread, but the baker doesn't see a payment method. He sees a relic. The coin is from the era of Emperor Decius, featuring the emperor's face. Ephesus, on the west coast of modern-day Turkey, was a cosmopolitan hub. The air smelled of sea salt and incense. But around 250 AD, the city became a very dangerous place to have a private opinion about the divine. The Roman Empire was in charge, and Emperor Decius, known as Decius in Islamic sources, wasn't interested in religious diversity. He issued a formal decree requiring every single person to offer sacrifices to the ancient Roman gods and recognize the emperor's own divinity. Now, this wasn't a suggestion. Under the Decius decree, sacrificing to idols was the only way to prove your loyalty to the state. For the Christians and other monotheists in Ephesus, this was a very simple, very lethal problem. Refusing the decree wasn't seen as a personal spiritual choice. It was considered treason. If you were caught refusing to bow to the statues, the state didn't send you to a debate. They sent you to be tortured. To Decius, failing to sacrifice was a direct attack on the Roman order. This created a climate of absolute terror, where hunting Christian men became a systematic government project. It's in this specific environment, this intersection of 3rd century bureaucracy and religious violence, that the 7 youths decided they'd seen enough of the city. These 7 noble young men weren't common citizens. Depending on the account, they were noblemen serving as advisors in the palace, childhood friends who had served in the military together. Their names are often listed as Maximilian, Iamblichus, and Martinian, among others. They had power, status, and luxury. But when they were brought before Emperor Decius, they didn't try to negotiate. They just stated, "Our Lord is the Lord of the heavens and the earth. We will never worship any god other than him." They confessed their faith in Christ and refused to bow to Roman idols. For most people, this would have been a suicide mission. Rather than wait for the same fate as the other prisoners, the group decided to flee. They didn't just leave, though. They gave their worldly goods to the poor before disappearing into the Highlands. They behaved like brothers, seeking a mountain cave on Mount Aṣḥāb to escape the emperor. They left behind everything, their possessions, wealth, and families, just to hide in a cave, hoping to avoid capture. A loyal dog joined them on their journey. This animal, known as Kitmir in Islamic tradition, followed them as they sought refuge in a cave on Mount Ankylos. Though, interestingly, the cave seems to move mountains depending on which text you read. Once inside, the youths prayed for mercy and salvation, asking for guidance as they prepared for death. They had chosen a worship besides the state-mandated Roman gods. Decius, of course, didn't let them go. He ordered his soldiers to hunt the young men and execute them to serve as an example. His order was simple: let those who refuse to sacrifice to our gods die there. Soldiers eventually found the cave, and following the orders, they sealed the entrance with massive stones to bury the young men alive. The group was essentially sealed shut, left to perish from hunger and thirst behind huge rocks. In the Christian narratives, the story is a bit more meticulous about documentation. 2 secret Christians among the soldiers were moved by the same faith. They engraved the names of the martyrs and the details of their suffering on lead plates. These 2 metal plaques were placed in a sealed container and hidden outside the cave. According to St. Jacob of Serug, these plaques were the only record they ever had. Wait, the dog. We should remember the dog. Kitmir stretched his 4 legs at the entrance of the cave, and according to the sources, he just stayed there. He didn't move. He didn't move for a long time. Inside the cave, the biological clock simply stopped. For 309 years, the sleepers remained in a state of suspended animation. The Quran states they stayed for 300 years, and then added 9 years more. To prevent their bodies from decaying, they were turned to the right and left sides while they slept. It was a precise cosmic choreography. Even the sun played a part. The Quran describes the sun as inclining away from the cave on the right when rising and passing away on the left when setting. This shift between cosmic thresholds was presented as one of the signs of Allah. Outside, the dog, Kitmir, stayed vigilant, with his two forelegs stretched out. There's a bit of a variance in the records, though. The Quran mentions several possibilities for the number of young men. Some say there were 3, with the dog as the 4th. Some say 5, with the dog as the 6th. And some say 7, with the dog as the 8th. The text actually advises against arguing over the number, stating that the knowledge belongs to God. When they finally woke up, the experience was seamless. They didn't feel the passage of centuries. Upon awakening, they questioned how long they'd been in the cave, believing they had only slept for a day, or maybe part of a day. This narrative didn't stay confined to a cave in Ephesus. It morphed into a cross-cultural phenomenon by the Middle Ages, spreading through translations into Greek, Latin, Syriac, Coptic, Armenian, Arabic, Ethiopic, and Sogdian. The source for many of these Eastern versions was the Syriac version, which serves as a Christian parallel to the Quranic story. In Islamic tradition, the story is known as Aṣḥāb al-Kahf or Aṣḥāb al-Kahf, which literally means companions of the cave. Their prayer is recorded in the Kahf Surah of the Quran, specifically Surah 18. While the story is also mentioned in the Bible and Jewish religious texts, the Quranic account differs from the Christian one. The Syriac Acts of the Seven Sleepers of Ephesus is estimated to be about 150 years older than the Quranic version. If you look at the Christian account, the details shift. The sleepers were 7 young Christian men from Ephesus who fled from Emperor Decius during the persecution between 249 and 251 AD. They refused to sacrifice to idols and sought refuge in a cave on Mount Silion. Their names are listed as Maximilian, Malchus, Martinian, Dionysius, John, Serapion, and Constantine. According to the Syriac narrative, these 7 didn't sleep for 300 years, they slept for 372 years. They finally awoke during the reign of Theodosius the Younger, also known as Theodosius II. It's a remarkably consistent pattern of divine stasis regardless of the tradition. You're essentially looking at the same story, just with different calendars. Academic research suggests this story wasn't born in a cave, but on a page. It was likely written by a Syrian poet and priest named Jacob of Saru, also known as James of Sarug, who lived between 450 and 521 AD. He composed it in a poetic book called Mimru, around 521 AD. This wasn't just a poetic exercise, though. In the 430s and 440s AD, a man named Bishop Theodore of Agi denied the bodily resurrection. The story of the 7 sleepers was used as a direct rebuttal to him, a theological mic drop to provide literal proof of the bodily resurrection of the flesh. For those fighting heretics, the story served as a testimony to the resurrection of the dead, mirroring the bodily resurrection of Jesus. From there, the story became a global export. Simeon Metaphrastes wrote the Greek version in his Lives of the Saints for July. Gregory of Tours translated the text into Latin. After that, the story reached the Norman territories, where Chardry wrote an Anglo-Norman poem titled Les Sept Dormans in French. One priest, one poet, and a few translators effectively turned a local legend into a standardized, multinational recording of history. It turns out that falling asleep for a few centuries is a surprisingly popular pastime in global mythology. The 7 sleepers aren't alone. In Britain, King Arthur is said to be in a deep sleep, waiting to return. In ancient Greece, Epimenides of Crete slept for 57 years in a cave dedicated to Zeus. He woke up to find that his younger brother had already become an old man. In Japan, a fisherman named Urashima Taro spent 3 days in the dragon palace under the sea. When he returned to the surface, 300 years had passed on land. This habit of skipping time shows up in other ancient texts too. The Babylonian Talmud tells of a sage named Honi HaMe'agel who slept for 70 years. In the Jewish text Rest of the Words of Jeremiah, there is the story of Imelech, the servant of Jeremiah, who reportedly slept for 66 years during the Babylonian exile. Even the Epic of Gilgamesh features a time nap. Gilgamesh falls asleep for 7 days as a test of immortality, a duration proven. The dog only appears in the Quran and later Christian retellings, which suggests the Quran may be the earliest secure witness for this detail. This dog at the cave entrance is often compared to the mythological hellhound or sentinel of death, drawing parallels to Cerberus in Greek myth and Anubis in Egyptian myth. It's a recurring pattern, a biological freeze that lasts long enough to make the world unrecognizable. Asking too many questions about these stories often came with a very high price. For centuries, the line between faith and heresy was thin, and some people stepped over it. Early Islamic scholars like Ibn al-Rawandi, Abu Bakr al-Razi, and Sohrawardi were persecuted, exiled, or executed for questioning the nature of revelation. They didn't just wonder about the logistics of a 300-year nap, they questioned the mechanics of how divine messages were delivered. Then there was Ibn Rushd, known in the West as Averroes. He tried to bridge the gap, claiming that stories are symbolic and that philosophy can reconcile with Sharia. It was a logical approach, but the authorities disagreed. Ibn Rushd was exiled and his books were burned. He found out that in the eyes of the state, a symbol is sometimes less valuable than a literal stone sealing a cave. It's a quiet irony that while the seven sleepers were protected by a mountain, the people who tried to analyze their story were often hunted across the plains. Now, let's look at the biological impossibility of a human sleeping for centuries. Today, we use therapeutic hypothermia to prevent brain damage, but that typically lasts only 72 hours. NASA is researching synthetic torpor, a form of human hibernation, to make long-term space travel to Mars possible. If they succeed, they could reduce food, water, and oxygen needs by up to 75%. Nature already does this on a smaller scale. Genetic research on Arctic ground squirrels shows that their hibernation nearly stops the aging process entirely. The sleepers of Ephesus, however, were not squirrels. If we move away from the physics, the temporal shift in the story finds a parallel in Einstein's theory of relativity. Einstein explained that time slows down near massive objects or at high speeds. In a world where the relative speed of time is a factual reality, the idea of waking up in a future century is no longer a metaphysical miracle. It's a physics problem. It's a simple matter of how much time passed for the observer versus the rest of the world. In the 1580s, an Ottoman sultan received a gift, a miniature painting, created by Said Lokman in Moria. It's a quiet image for a story that has spawned a global map of claims. If you want to find the actual cave, well, you have several options. There are sites in Ephesus, Mersin Tarsus, Marash, Diyarbakir, and Jordan. I visited the site in Jordan. The cave is located about 7 or 8 kilometers south of Amman on a road called Rasul Amman. Depending on who you ask, it's known as Al-Rajib Road or Ras al-Kahf. It's a modest operation. The cave is open daily from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., no ticket required. A guard is always there, and visitors are typically given 15 minutes to tour, though you can ask for 20 or 30. Around 2000 or 2010, a new mosque was built nearby to accommodate tourists from all 3 Abrahamic faiths. Then there's the site in Selçuk, Izmir. At the foot of Panayır Mountain, the Cave of the Seven Sleepers is a major tourist attraction. German archaeological teams uncovered the cave in the 1930s, and excavations found pottery, Christian symbolism, and inscriptions about the sleepers. The Vatican declared the young men saints and organized large events on July 27th, following the Roman martyrology and the Byzantine calendar. But wait, there's more. 7 men and a dog stayed perfectly still while the world changed, the empire fell, and the entire religious landscape of the Mediterranean shifted. The most absurd part of this is that while these men were asleep, the entire world they